The couch cushions had molded themselves to my spine after 3 weeks of restless nights. I pressed my face deeper into the scratchy fabric, inhaling the scent of my son Marvin's aftershave mixed with his wife Dorothy's vanilla candles, a combination that had become the smell of my exile. Through the thin apartment walls, I could hear them whispering in their bedroom, their voices low and urgent, discussing me like I was a problem to be solved rather than the woman who had raised him. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. At 62, I never imagined I'd be sleeping on a fold-out couch in my own son's living room, my entire life reduced to 2 suitcases tucked behind the entertainment center. The divorce papers were still warm from the lawyer's printer when Marvin had offered me this temporary solution. His words, not mine. Temporary. As if my 30-year marriage dissolving overnight was just a minor inconvenience that would sort itself out by Christmas. The morning light filtered through Dorothy's pristine white curtains, casting shadows across the hardwood floors I wasn't allowed to walk on with shoes. Every rule in this house was unspoken but absolute. Don't use the good towels, don't touch the thermostat, don't cook anything that might leave a smell. I had become a ghost, haunting the edges of their perfect life. I heard Marvin's alarm buzz at precisely 6:15 a.m., followed by the sound of the shower running. Dorothy would be next, taking her 20-minute beauty routine that left the bathroom fogged with expensive moisturizers and serums. By the time I was allowed my turn, there would be no hot water left. It was a small cruelty, perhaps unintentional, but it stung all the same. "Mom, you're up early." Marvin appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his charcoal suit, hair perfectly styled. At 35, he had inherited his father's sharp jawline and my stubborn streak, though he seemed to have forgotten where the latter came from. "Couldn't sleep," I said, making instant coffee with water I'd heated in the microwave. The good coffee maker was off limits. Dorothy's wedding gift from her mother, she'd explained with that tight smile she reserved for me. Dorothy and I were talking. He loosened his tie slightly, a nervous habit from childhood. "We think it might be time for you to start looking at more permanent arrangements." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Permanent arrangements? Senior living communities. They have great programs now. Social activities. Meal plans. His voice trailed off as he watched my face. "Mom, you know this was always temporary." "Of course." I set down my mug with more force than necessary. How silly of me to think I might stay until I got back on my feet. "Don't be like that. You know we want to help." "Help?" The word came out sharper than intended. "Marvin, yesterday you drove Dorothy's mother to look at that new apartment complex on Maple Street, the one with the granite countertops and the in-unit laundry." His Adam's apple bobbed. "That's different. Barbara has specific needs. She has a perfectly good house she doesn't want to sell. My specific need is a place to sleep that isn't your couch." Dorothy appeared then, her blonde hair twisted into a sleek bun, already dressed for her job at the marketing firm. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, avoiding eye contact with me while she prepared her protein smoothie. "Morning, Martha," she said without looking up from the blender. The use of my full name instead of Mom felt deliberate, a small but constant reminder that I was not family. I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. "Good morning, dear." I forced brightness into my voice. "Marvin was just telling me about your plans for your mother's new apartment." Dorothy's hand stilled on the blender button. "Mother needed a change of scenery. The house was too big after Daddy passed." "Of course. 3 bedrooms is enormous for one person." I glanced meaningfully around their 2-bedroom apartment, where I'd been sleeping in the living room for nearly a month. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Marvin cleared his throat. "Mom, about the baby's room." "What about it?" I turned to face him fully. The spare bedroom they'd been using for storage had been cleared out last week, painted a soft yellow in preparation for their first child. Dorothy was barely showing at 4 months, but they'd already started shopping for cribs and changing tables. "Dorothy needs the space to set up the nursery. She's been stressed about getting everything ready, and with the baby coming—" "I wasn't suggesting I sleep in there permanently, Marvin, just until I find somewhere else to go." My voice remained steady, but inside, something was beginning to crack. One night in a real bed, maybe 2. Dorothy finally looked at me, her green eyes cool and assessing. "Martha, I think you're missing the point. This is about boundaries, about what's appropriate." Appropriate. I repeated the word slowly, tasting its bitter flavor. And what would be appropriate for a woman whose husband of 30 years decided to trade her in for his secretary? Mom. No, Marvin. Let me understand this. Your unborn child needs their room more than your homeless mother needs a bed. Is that correct? The color drained from his face. You're not homeless. You have options. Dad offered you the condo in Florida. Your father offered me a one-bedroom condo 2,000 miles away from my only child, contingent on me signing away my claim to half our assets. Very generous of him. Dorothy's smoothie word to life, drowning out whatever Marvin might have said next. When the blender stopped, the silence felt heavier than before. "If you wanted comfort," Marvin said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "you should have stayed married to Dad." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my son, this man I had carried, nursed, raised, loved unconditionally for 35 years, and saw a stranger, someone who could reduce my marriage, my pain, my entire life to such a cruel oversimplification. "I see." I set my coffee mug in the sink with exaggerated care. "Thank you for clarifying where I stand." "Mom, I didn't mean—" But I was already walking away. Back to my makeshift bed. Back to my suitcases and my shame. Behind me, I heard Dorothy murmur something about tough love and enabling, words that followed me like smoke. I spent the day researching rental properties on my phone, calculating and recalculating my meager savings. The divorce settlement was still being contested, my joint bank accounts frozen while lawyers argued over who deserved what from our demolished life. I had exactly $847 in my personal checking account. Money I'd saved from grocery budgets and birthday gifts over the years, hidden away in an account Walter never knew about. $847. At 62, with no job and no credit in my own name, it might as well have been 8 cents. That evening, I walked to the corner market 3 blocks from Marvin's apartment. The owner, Mr. Patel, had gotten used to me buying single-serving portions of everything. 1 can of soup, 1 sleeve of crackers, 1 small container of yogurt, food that wouldn't take up space in Dorothy's refrigerator or leave evidence of my existence. At the checkout counter, I stared at the lottery ticket display. Powerball was up to $3 million, the sign declared in bright red letters. $3 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. "You feeling lucky today, Mrs. Harris?" "Mr. O?" Patel asked with a kind smile. He'd learned my name weeks ago. Probably the only person in this neighborhood who treated me like I mattered. I looked down at the crumpled $10 bill in my hand. Gas money for job interviews that hadn't materialized. Or food for the next 2 days. Or, "One quick pick," I heard myself say. Mr. Patel fed the ticket into the machine, and it spit out a small rectangle of paper covered in numbers. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, Powerball 18. I stared at the numbers, trying to find some meaning in their random arrangement. "Good luck," Mr. Patel said, handing me my change. $8, all the money I had left in the world. I walked back to Marvin's apartment in the gathering dusk, the lottery ticket folded carefully in my wallet next to my expired credit cards and my marriage certificate. 2 equally worthless pieces of paper, I thought bitterly. The apartment was empty when I returned. A note on the counter informed me that Marvin and Dorothy had gone to dinner at her mother's new place. Of course they had. Barbara would be showing off her granite countertops and walk-in closets while I ate canned soup from a coffee mug. I settled onto the couch and turned on the evening news, half listening to the anchor discuss traffic patterns and weather forecasts. At exactly 11:17 p.m. during the commercial break, the lottery numbers flashed across the screen. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, Powerball 18. I stared at the television, certain I was hallucinating. Then I pulled out my ticket with trembling hands and compared the numbers again and again. Every single one matched. The lottery ticket fluttered to the floor as I sank back into the couch cushions. $3 million. After taxes, maybe $2 million. Enough to buy a house. Enough to never sleep on anyone's couch again. enough to look my son in the eye and tell him exactly what I thought of his tough love. But as I sat there in the dark, staring at those life-changing numbers, only one thought echoed in my mind. If you wanted comfort, you should have stayed married to Dad. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, I would let them sleep peacefully in their bed, blissfully unaware that the woman they'd dismissed as a burden had just become wealthier than they'd ever dreamed of being. I picked up the lottery ticket and held it to the light, watching those beautiful numbers dance before my eyes. The question wasn't what I would do with the money. The question was what I would do with the power. I didn't sleep. How could I? The lottery ticket lay on the coffee table beside me like a loaded weapon, its innocent appearance belying the power it contained. Every few minutes I would reach for it, checking the numbers again against the screenshot I'd taken of the television broadcast. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, Powerball, 18. Each time, the reality felt more surreal. $3 million. After taxes, somewhere around $2 million. More money than Walter and I had accumulated in 30 years of marriage. More than Marvin would see in a decade of his mid-level management salary. The irony was almost too perfect. The same day my son told me I should have stayed married for comfort, I'd become more financially secure than any of them. At 5:30 a.m., I heard Marvin's alarm through the thin walls. My body was coiled with nervous energy, every muscle tense with the secret I carried. I forced myself to lie still, to breathe normally, to play the role of the defeated woman they expected me to be. Just a little longer. Marvin emerged from the bedroom in his usual morning routine, hair disheveled, reaching for his coffee maker. He moved through the kitchen without acknowledging my presence on the couch, a habit that had developed over the past 3 weeks. I had become furniture to him, as invisible and unremarkable as the throw pillows Dorothy had arranged just so. "Morning," I said softly, just to watch him flinch. "Oh, Mom, didn't know you were awake." He fumbled with the coffee filter, his movements jerky. "Listen, about last night. What I said about Dad, you meant every word." I sat up, pulling the thin throw blanket around my shoulders. "Don't insult us both by pretending otherwise." His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to apologize." "No, you're trying to manage your guilt. There's a difference." Dorothy appeared then, her silk robe pristine even at dawn, her hair somehow still perfect from yesterday's styling. She moved to the refrigerator, extracting ingredients for her morning smoothie with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, Martha." The name still landed like a small slap. "How did you sleep?" "Wonderfully. Thank you for asking." I smiled, and something in my expression made her pause, blender in hand. "Marvin, did you remember to pick up those paint samples? I want to finalize the nursery colors this weekend." "Already in the car," he replied, not looking at me. "Mom, we need to talk about timelines. Dorothy's mother is coming to help with baby preparations next month, and you'll need the living room." I nodded calmly. Of course. Family should always come first. They exchanged a look, surprise at my reasonable tone, perhaps relief that I wasn't going to make this difficult for them. If only they knew. "I'll start looking at places today," I continued, standing and folding the blanket with military precision. "Might even have some good news by tonight." "Good news?" Dorothy's voice carried a note of suspicion. "A woman my age doesn't have many options, but I'm resourceful. You'd be surprised what opportunities exist when you're properly motivated." Marvin's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "Mom, you're not thinking of doing anything dramatic, are you?" I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in weeks. "Dramatic?" "Marvin, I'm 62 years old. The most dramatic thing I do these days is buy the expensive laundry detergent." But as I gathered my things for a shower, I caught Dorothy watching me in the hallway mirror, her green eyes narrow with something like concern. She was sharper than Marvin, more attuned to subtext. She sensed something had shifted, even if she couldn't identify what. After they left for work, I called the lottery office. The woman who answered had clearly handled plenty of shocked winners before. "Mrs. Harris, congratulations. We'll need you to come in person to begin the claim process. Can you make it in today?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What should I bring?" Photo ID, social security card, and the winning ticket. We recommend you sign the back immediately and store it safely. And Mrs. Harris, you might want to consider whether you'd like the lump sum or annuity payments. Lump sum. I didn't have time for 30 years of gradual payouts. I needed immediate, undeniable power. The lottery office was a sterile government building downtown, the kind of place where dreams were either realized or crushed with equal bureaucratic efficiency. I sat in the waiting room beside other hopefuls clutching losing tickets, my winning slip sealed in a plastic bag inside my purse. Martha Harris? A middle-aged man in a cheap suit called my name. I'm Jim Martinez, claims supervisor. Congratulations on your big win. The next 2 hours were a blur of paperwork, verification processes, and legal disclaimers. Jim explained the tax implications, the payment options, the media release forms. Through it all, I maintained perfect composure. The grieving divorcee transformed into a businesswoman negotiating the deal of her lifetime. The lump sum after federal and state taxes will be approximately $1.8 million, Jim explained, sliding a calculator across his desk. We can have the first installment processed within 5 business days. Perfect. I signed my name with a steady hand. And Mr. Martinez, I'd prefer to keep this confidential for now. Is that possible? Of course. Many winners choose privacy, especially initially. You have 60 days before you're required to claim publicly. 60 days. More than enough time to put my plan into motion. I walked out of that building a millionaire, though nothing had changed visibly. I still wore the same discount store clothes, still carried the same worn purse, still drove Marvin's old Honda that he'd loaned me after the divorce. But inside, everything was different. The weight of powerlessness had lifted, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Instead of returning to the apartment immediately, I drove to the public library and spent the afternoon researching real estate listings in our area, property values, investment strategies. I had been an economics major before marriage derailed my career plans, skills I'd thought were permanently buried under 3 decades of domestic life. By evening, I had identified 3 potential properties: a modest ranch house on 2 acres outside town, a condo complex that was being foreclosed, and something that made my pulse quicken: a 40-acre plot with an old farmhouse, currently being sold by a family desperate to settle an estate quickly. The farmhouse property was perfect, remote enough for privacy, large enough for possibilities. And the price was right, $300,000, leaving me plenty of capital for renovations and other investments. Marvin was already home when I returned, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop, Dorothy beside him scrolling through baby furniture websites. "How was the job hunting?" he asked without looking up. "Productive." I set my purse down carefully, the lottery paperwork hidden inside. I might have found something. "Oh?" Dorothy's tone was cautiously hopeful. "What kind of work?" "Consulting, a company that needs someone with my background to evaluate investment opportunities." Not entirely a lie. I was certainly consulting with myself about investments. "That sounds promising," Marvin said, though I detected skepticism in his voice. "When would you start?" "Soon. Very soon." I moved to the refrigerator, helping myself to leftover takeout that I would have asked permission to eat just yesterday. I might need to travel for a few days, look at some properties the company is considering. "Properties?" Dorothy's interest sharpened. "For what kind of business?" "Agricultural ventures, sustainable farming, animal rehabilitation. Growing markets, apparently." I took a bite of cold Chinese food, savoring both the flavor and the lie. "The position comes with housing, company property." I watched their faces carefully. Relief warred with suspicion in Marvin's expression, while Dorothy looked almost disappointed, as if she'd been looking forward to the fight of evicting me. "Mom, that's great news. I'm happy for you." "Are you?" I met his eyes directly for the first time in weeks. "Because you seemed pretty convinced yesterday that I'd made irreversible mistakes, that I'd chosen my circumstances." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was frustrated. I said things I didn't mean. "No, Marvin. You said things you meant but wished you hadn't said aloud. There's a difference." Dorothy cleared her throat. "The important thing is that you're moving forward. Finding independence. Independence. I savored the word. Yes, that's exactly what I'm finding. That night, I lay on the couch for the last time, staring at the ceiling and listening to my son and his wife murmur behind their closed door. Tomorrow, I would drive out to see the farmhouse. By the end of the week, I would own it. Within a month, I would be completely transformed from the woman who had begged for a night in the baby's room. But transformation wasn't enough. Justice required more than personal success. It demanded consequences for those who had shown such casual cruelty to someone they claimed to love. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about the caretaker's cottage I'd noticed in the farmhouse listing photos. A small, basic structure on the property, originally built for hired help. Nothing luxurious about it. Just 4 walls, a roof, and the bare minimum amenities. Perfect for housing people who suddenly found themselves in need of shelter. Perfect for teaching lessons about gratitude and humility. Perfect for the justice that was coming, whether my son realized it or not. The numbers on my lottery ticket seemed to glow in the darkness. 7 to 14, 23, 31, 42. Powerball 18. Numbers that would soon become the foundation of everything Marvin and Dorothy thought they knew about power, family, and consequences. Tomorrow, I would begin building my new life. Tonight, I would dream of theirs crumbling down. The farmhouse sat like a forgotten dream at the end of a winding gravel road, 40 acres of rolling pasture stretching beyond its weathered porch. I pulled up in Marvin's borrowed Honda, dust settling around the tires as I stepped out into the crisp morning air. The real estate agent, a thin woman named Carol with nervous energy and coffee breath, was already waiting. "Mrs. Harris, welcome to Meadowbrook Farm. As I mentioned on the phone, the family is motivated to sell quickly." She gestured toward the 2-story house with its peeling white paint and sagging shutters. "It needs work, but the bones are solid. Built in 1952. Completely updated plumbing and electrical in 2018. I walked through the rooms with practiced calm, though inside I was cataloging every possibility. The kitchen was outdated but functional, the living room spacious enough for the life I was planning. Upstairs, 4 bedrooms offered space for the sanctuary I envisioned, not just for myself, but for the animals I intended to rescue. "Tell me about the outbuildings," I said, following Carol outside. "Well, there's the old barn. Needs some roof repair, but structurally sound. And over there," she pointed to a small structure about 100 yards from the main house. "That's the caretaker's cottage. Previous owners used it for seasonal help." I walked toward the cottage with measured steps, my heart pounding despite my composed exterior. It was perfect in its simplicity. A living room barely large enough for a couch, a kitchen with ancient appliances, 2 small bedrooms, and a bathroom that had seen better decades. The windows were clean but small, the floors cheap linoleum over plywood. It was exactly what someone who had lost everything in a bad deal deserved. "How quickly could we close?" I asked, returning to where Carol waited by her sedan. "The estate attorney is pushing for 30 days, but with cash," she tilted her head hopefully. 20 days. All cash, no inspections, as is condition. Her eyes widened. "Mrs. Harris, are you sure? Without an inspection?" "I'm sure." I handed her my business card, hastily printed that morning with my new consulting company name. "Have the contracts drawn up. I'll wire the earnest money this afternoon." 3 weeks later, I stood in my own kitchen, watching the morning sun stream through windows that belonged to me. The transformation had been swift and purposeful. I'd hired contractors to repair the barn, update the cottage's plumbing, and install fencing suitable for horses and smaller animals. The main house received only essential repairs. I had other priorities for my money. The animal rescue had been Walter's idea, ironically. During one of our last bitter arguments, he'd sneered that I should go rescue some stray dogs, since you're so good at taking in hopeless cases. He'd meant it as an insult, but I'd filed it away as inspiration. Within a month, Meadowbrook had its first residents. 3 horses rescued from a bankrupt riding stable, 2 goats nobody wanted, and a revolving population of dogs and cats from the county shelter. I hired Gloria, a 23-year-old veterinary student, to help with daily care. She was grateful to live in the cottage's smaller bedroom in exchange for work and a small salary. "Mrs. Harris, The new fencing looks great, Gloria said one morning as we fed the horses. These guys are so much happier with room to run. I smiled, watching Thunder, a massive black gelding, nuzzle the fence where I stood. Everyone deserves space to breathe, Gloria. Everyone deserves to feel safe. I hadn't spoken to Marvin in 6 weeks. He'd called twice in the first month, dutiful son checking on his displaced mother, but I'd let them go to voicemail. His messages grew progressively shorter. Mom, just checking in. Call me back. Then, getting worried. Can you please call? Finally, Mom, where are you? I never returned his calls. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Dorothy's pregnancy was progressing well. They'd finished the nursery in soft yellow and green, had a baby shower where Dorothy's mother played hostess in her granite-countered apartment. They were happy, settled, secure in their choices. That made what came next even more satisfying. The first sign of trouble was Marvin's LinkedIn post, exploring new opportunities in the financial sector, open to discussing exciting possibilities. Corporate speak for "I've been fired." Within a week, Gloria mentioned seeing a young man in an expensive suit asking questions about me at the hardware store in town. He seemed really stressed, she told me as we mucked out stalls. Asked if I knew Martha Harris. Said he was your son looking for you. What did you tell him? That I'd never heard the name. Wasn't technically lying. You're always Mrs. Harris to me. Smart girl. I'd chosen my help well. Marvin's next move was predictable. He hired a private investigator. The man was competent enough to trace my movements to the lottery office, to discover the property purchase, to learn about my new identity as a consulting entrepreneur. What he couldn't discover was the source of my sudden wealth. I'd buried that information under layers of shell companies and careful financial planning. 2 months after I'd disappeared from his couch, Marvin finally found me. I was in the south pasture, brushing Thunder's coat in the afternoon sun, when I heard a car engine struggling up the gravel drive. Through the trees, I glimpsed a familiar silver sedan, Marvin's car, the one he'd insisted was too valuable to let me drive to job interviews. I continued brushing Thunder's flank, my movement steady and calm. The horse's warmth radiated through the brush, his breathing deep and peaceful. He'd been so skittish when he arrived, scared of every sudden movement. Now he stood quietly, trusting. Mom? Marvin's voice carried across the pasture, uncertain and somehow smaller than I remembered. I didn't turn around. Mom, I know you can hear me. Thunder nickered softly, turning his great head toward the sound. I scratched behind his ears, murmuring reassurances. Finally, I looked up. Marvin stood at the fence line, still wearing his business clothes though it was Saturday. His hair was disheveled, his usually crisp shirt wrinkled. He looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. Hello, Marvin. Mom, what the hell is going on? You disappeared, you're not answering calls, and now I find you on some farm playing with horses? I set down the brush and walked slowly toward the fence, Thunder following like a loyal dog. This is my home. These are my animals. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Your home? His voice cracked slightly. Mom, how are you affording this? The investigator said you bought this place with cash. Where did you get that kind of money? The same place anyone gets money, Marvin. I earned it. Doing what? You haven't worked in 30 years. I met his eyes through the fence rails. I've been working all my life. I just wasn't getting paid for it. He ran his hands through his hair. Another childhood gesture that would have softened my heart just months ago. Now it simply looked like weakness. Look, I know we had some difficult conversations before you left. Before I left, the words came out sharper than intended. Marvin, you threw me out. You literally told me I should have stayed married if I wanted comfort. I was frustrated. The situation was complicated. For you, it was complicated for you. I turned away from the fence, walking back toward Thunder. For me, it was quite simple. My son chose his wife's comfort over his mother's basic dignity. That's not fair. I spun around, and Marvin actually stepped back at whatever he saw in my face. Fair? You want to discuss fair? Let's talk about your mother-in-law's 3-bedroom apartment while I slept on your couch. Let's talk about being told I couldn't use your shower until you and Dorothy were finished. Let's talk about asking for one night in a real bed and being told I'd chosen my circumstances. Mom, please. I'm not finished. My voice carried across the pasture like a whip crack. Let's talk about 27 years of birthday parties I hosted, Christmas mornings I orchestrated, scraped knees I bandaged, nightmares I chased away. Let's talk about the college tuition I insisted your father pay even when money was tight. Let's talk about the wedding I helped plan and paid for even though Dorothy made it clear I was an inconvenience in her perfect day. Marvin's face had gone pale. I know you sacrificed. Sacrificed? I laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. Marvin, I didn't sacrifice. I invested. I invested 35 years of my life in a human being I believed would love me enough to offer more than a couch when I needed help. I do love you. That's why I'm here. No, you're here because your comfortable little world is falling apart, and you need something from me. I walked back to the fence, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of desperation he was trying to hide. Tell me, how's the new job search going? His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Oh, you think I don't know? Marvin, I may be a 62-year-old woman who was sleeping on your couch 2 months ago, but I'm not stupid. I know about Henderson and Associates letting you go. I know about the botched Morrison account that cost them $500,000. I know about the apartment lease you can't afford, and the credit cards you're maxing out to maintain Dorothy's lifestyle. How could you possibly? The same way I know that Dorothy's mother isn't paying for that new apartment. The same way I know you co-signed a loan you shouldn't have to keep your wife happy. I smiled, and Marvin visibly flinched. Information is just another form of currency, son. And unlike you, I've learned to spend mine wisely. Behind him, I noticed a U-Haul truck pulling up the drive. What's that? I asked mildly. Marvin turned, his shoulders sagging when he saw the truck. Dorothy climbed out of the passenger seat, her pregnancy now clearly visible at 7 months, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. Mom, we need help, Marvin said finally, the words ripping out of him like a confession. The apartment's gone. The bank called our loan. We have nowhere else to go. I watched Dorothy approach the fence, her green eyes taking in the property, the animals, the obvious prosperity I'd built while they struggled. When she reached us, she looked directly at me for the first time since that morning in their kitchen. Hello, Martha. Hello, Dorothy. I turned to Marvin. And you came here because? Because you're family, he said desperately. Because despite everything, you're still my mother. I looked at them both. My son who had thrown me away when I was inconvenient, his wife who had treated me like an unwelcome guest in their home. Now they stood before me, homeless and desperate, expecting the woman they'd dismissed to save them. Think of your grandson, Dorothy said suddenly, her hand moving protectively to her rounded belly. I did think of him. I thought of the child who would learn about family loyalty from these two people. I thought of the values he would absorb about how you treat people when they're vulnerable. I thought of what kind of man he might become. That's when I smiled and walked toward the cottage where Gloria was watching from the porch, clearly enjoying the drama. Gloria, could you show our guests to their accommodations? Gloria descended from the cottage porch with the easy grace of someone who belonged exactly where she was. At 23, she possessed the kind of confidence that comes from knowing your worth. Something I'd forgotten until recently. She nodded to Marvin and Dorothy with polite disinterest, as if desperate people with U-Hauls appeared at our gate every day. Mrs. Harris? She asked, though her eyes sparkled with barely contained amusement. Gloria, this is my son Marvin and his wife Dorothy. They'll be staying in the cottage. I paused, letting the words settle. Temporarily, of course. Dorothy's face cycled through a series of expressions. Hope, confusion, and finally something approaching horror as she really looked at the small structure behind Gloria. Martha, that's very generous of you, but we were hoping— You were hoping for what, exactly? I kept my voice pleasant. Conversational. The main house? My bedroom? My space? Marvin stepped forward quickly. Mom, we're grateful for anything. We just need somewhere to stay while we get back on our feet. Of course you do. I walked toward the cottage, gesturing for them to follow. Come, Let me show you around your new home. The cottage's front door opened directly into the living room, a space barely large enough for the threadbare couch Gloria had picked up at a thrift store and the small television mounted on the wall. The kitchen was visible from the front door, its yellowed appliances and chipped laminate counters a stark contrast to the granite and stainless steel they'd grown accustomed to. "It's cozy," Dorothy said weakly, her manicured hand trailing along the worn Formica counter. "It has everything you need," I replied. "Running water, electricity, heat, more than many people have." I opened cabinets to reveal basic dishes, mismatched glasses, the kind of kitchen supplies you'd find at a discount store. Gloria's been using the second bedroom, but she's moving her things to the main house today. You'll have both bedrooms to yourselves. Marvin peered down the narrow hallway. Both bedrooms. Well, one's quite small. Probably just right for a nursery, though. When the baby comes. I smiled at Dorothy's pale face. You did want to think of your grandson, didn't you? The tour continued through the cramped bathroom with its stained bathtub and the two bedrooms, one barely large enough for a double bed, the other sized for a child. Everything was clean but worn, functional but without any hint of luxury or comfort. "This is temporary," Marvin said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as us. "Just until I find another job. The market's tough right now, but something will come up. I'm sure it will." I walked back to the living room, my footsteps echoing on the thin flooring. "There are a few house rules we should discuss." Dorothy sank onto the couch, her pregnancy making her movements awkward. "Rules? This is a working farm. We start early, 5 a.m. feeding schedule. The animals don't care about human convenience." I counted off on my fingers. "No loud music or television after 9 p.m. The horses are sensitive to noise. No unauthorized visitors without prior approval. No alcohol on the property. It spooks the rescue animals. And everyone contributes to the work. No exceptions." "Work?" Marvin's voice climbed higher. "Mom, Dorothy's 7 months pregnant. She can't be doing farm labor." "Then I suppose you'll have to work twice as hard to make up for it." I met his eyes steadily. "Unless you'd prefer to find other accommodations?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Through the cottage window, I could see their U-Haul truck loaded with boxes, furniture, the remnants of their comfortable life. They had nowhere else to go, and we all knew it. "The work starts tomorrow," I continued. "Gloria will show you the routine. Feeding, mucking stalls, fence repairs, general maintenance. It's honest work. Good for building character." Dorothy's composure finally cracked. "Martha, this is insane. We're not farmhands. Marvin has a college degree, a career." "Had," I corrected gently. "He had a career. Now he has an opportunity to learn the value of physical labor." I turned to my son, who was staring at me like I'd become a stranger. "Marvin, do you remember when you were 8 and wanted that expensive bicycle for your birthday?" His brow furrowed. "What does that have to do with anything? I told you that if you wanted it, you'd have to earn half the money yourself. You mowed lawns all summer, saved every penny. When September came, you had your bicycle and something more valuable. You understood what things actually cost." "Mom, that was different. I was a child learning a lesson." "And what are you now?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Because 2 months ago, you were a man who told his homeless mother she should have stayed married if she wanted comfort. Today, you're a man asking that same mother for shelter. So tell me, Marvin, what exactly are you now?" His face flushed red. "I'm your son." "Yes, you are. And that's the only reason you're standing in this cottage instead of sleeping in your car." I moved toward the door. "Gloria will bring you some basic supplies. Towels, sheets, soap. There's a washer and dryer in the main house basement. You can use them twice a week." "Wait!" Dorothy struggled to her feet, her hand pressed to her lower back. "What about medical care? I have appointments, prenatal checkups. The hospital is 40 minutes away. There's a Honda Civic in the barn, 2018 model, reliable transportation. You can use it for necessities, medical appointments, grocery shopping in town. The keys are on a hook by the barn door." Marvin's mouth fell open. "You have a car just sitting in the barn?" "I have several things you don't know about, Marvin. I've discovered I'm quite good at acquiring assets when properly motivated. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a glass of wine, watching Marvin and Dorothy unload their belongings. Gloria had moved her few possessions to the main house with cheerful efficiency, claiming she preferred the larger bedroom and private bathroom I'd offered her upstairs. "This is better than cable," Gloria said, settling into the chair beside me with her own glass. "That woman's face when she saw the kitchen. Dorothy's accustomed to certain standards," I replied. "This will be educational." Through the cottage windows, I could see them moving around the cramped spaces, trying to figure out where to put their king-sized bed in a room designed for a double, how to fit their extensive wardrobe in a closet the size of a phone booth. Dorothy's careful arrangements of throw pillows and decorative objects looked absurd in the basic living room. "Mrs. Harris," Gloria said carefully, "can I ask why you're doing this? I mean, they're family." "Are they?" I sipped my wine, watching Marvin struggle with a box that was clearly too heavy for him. "Gloria, what makes someone family? Biology? Legal documents? Or the way they treat you when you're vulnerable?" She was quiet for a moment. "My parents threw me out when I came out as gay. Said I wasn't their daughter anymore if I was going to live in sin. My girlfriend's mom took me in, helped me apply for college, co-signed my student loans. She's more family to me than the people who share my DNA." "Exactly. Family is what you build, not what you're born into." As if summoned by our conversation, Marvin appeared on the cottage porch. Even from a distance, I could see the exhaustion in his shoulders, the way he stared out at the darkening fields like a man contemplating escape routes he didn't have. "He looks lost," Gloria observed. "He is lost. For the first time in his adult life, Marvin is facing consequences for his choices. It's terrifying when you're used to other people absorbing the cost of your comfort." My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Martha, this is Dorothy. Could we talk? Privately?" I showed the message to Gloria, who snorted with laughter. "Oh, this should be good. Want me to make popcorn?" "That won't be necessary. But do keep an eye on them. I suspect this is just the beginning." I walked to the cottage, my footsteps loud on the gravel path. Dorothy met me at the door, her earlier composure completely abandoned. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her expensive maternity clothes wrinkled from unpacking. "Martha, we need to talk." "Of course we do." I stepped inside, noting how their furniture overwhelmed the small space. Their leather sectional sofa took up half the living room, making movement awkward. "I see you're settling in." "This isn't settling. This is—" She gestured helplessly around the room. "This is punishment." "Is it? I offered you shelter when you had none. I'm providing transportation, utilities, a place to raise your child. Many people would consider that generosity. You know exactly what this is." Dorothy's green eyes blazed with anger. "You're humiliating us, making us live like what, Dorothy? Like people who don't have granite countertops and walk-in closets? Like people whose circumstances have changed through no fault of their own? Like women whose marriages have ended and find themselves dependent on the kindness of family?" She had the grace to look away. "Tell me," I continued, settling onto their oversized couch, "how does it feel to sleep somewhere that isn't really yours? To use a bathroom that belongs to someone else? To worry about whether you're welcome or just tolerated?" "Point made," she whispered. "Oh, I don't think it is. You see, Dorothy, I spent 3 weeks learning those feelings. You'll have much longer to truly understand them." Marvin appeared in the doorway, clearly having heard at least part of our conversation. "Mom, how long are you planning to keep us here?" "Keep you?" I stood, smoothing my skirt with deliberate care. "Marvin, no one is keeping you anywhere. You're free to leave anytime you choose. You have a car, you have your possessions, you have each other. You can drive away right now if you'd prefer other arrangements." The silence that followed was answer enough. "I thought so." I moved toward the door. "Breakfast is at 6 a.m. Gloria will show you the feeding routine. We'll see how quickly you adapt to your new circumstances." As I walked back to the main house, I heard Dorothy's muffled sobs through the cottage windows. Part of me, a small, weak part I was learning to silence, wanted to go back, to comfort her, to make this easier. But comfort, as my son had taught me, was something you earned, and they were just beginning to understand the price. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen watching the sunrise paint the pastures gold, a cup of real coffee, the expensive kind, warming my hands. Through the window, I could see Marvin mucking out Thunder's stall, his movements efficient now, his soft business hands calloused from months of honest work. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. "Morning, Mrs. Harris." Gloria appeared in the doorway, baby Willie gurgling contentedly in her arms. At 3 months old, he was a beautiful child. Dark hair like his father, Dorothy's green eyes, and a temperament that seemed mercifully calm given the circumstances of his birth. "Morning, Gloria. How did he sleep?" "Like an angel." "Dorothy's still exhausted, though. I told her I'd take the first feeding so she could rest." Gloria settled into the kitchen chair I'd pulled close to the window months ago, adjusting Willie against her shoulder with practiced ease. It was remarkable how naturally Gloria had assumed the role of surrogate grandmother. When Dorothy had gone into labor 6 weeks early, stress, the doctor said, Gloria had been the one to drive them to the hospital, the one to pace the waiting room, the one to bring them home to the cottage where a crib now occupied most of the smaller bedroom. I had visited exactly once, bringing a casserole and a handmade quilt I'd found at a local craft fair. Dorothy had cried when she saw it, the first genuine tears I'd witnessed from her, born of exhaustion and gratitude rather than self-pity. "Mrs. Harris," she'd whispered, holding Willie while I spread the quilt over the cottage's threadbare couch. "I know what this is, what you're doing, but he's innocent in all of this." "Yes," I'd agreed, smoothing the quilt's edges. "He is. That's why he has a roof over his head, and food in his belly, and people who love him." I'd met her eyes then, seeing something I hadn't expected: acceptance. What he doesn't have is a grandmother who will enable his parents to take that love for granted. Now, watching Gloria coo at Willie while Marvin worked in the barn, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the desperate quiet of survival, but the deep satisfaction of justice served and lessons learned. "He's getting stronger," Gloria said, following my gaze to Marvin, "both physically and otherwise." She was right. The soft executive who'd thrown me out 6 months ago had been replaced by someone leaner, steadier, more thoughtful. The physical labor had burned away his corporate arrogance, and the complete reversal of power dynamics had taught him humility in ways no motivational seminar ever could have. "Yesterday, he asked me about expanding the rescue program," Gloria continued. "Said he'd been thinking about how we could take in more horses, maybe some cattle from that farm closure up north." "Did he?" I sipped my coffee, unsurprised but pleased. Marvin had always been intelligent. He'd simply needed his assumptions challenged to remember how to think beyond his own immediate comfort. And Dorothy's been helping with the bookkeeping. She's actually quite good with numbers. Better than me, anyway. This was news. "Since when?" "About a month now. She asked if there was anything she could do to help with the business side while she's nursing. Says she majored in accounting before she switched to marketing." Gloria shifted Willie to her other arm. "I think she's trying to prove she belongs here." Through the window, I watched Marvin emerge from Thunder's stall and walk toward the cottage. His stride was different now, less hurried, more purposeful. He paused at the cottage door, looking back toward the main house, and I saw him notice my silhouette in the kitchen window. He raised his hand in a tentative wave. I didn't wave back, but I didn't turn away either. "They're different people than they were 6 months ago," Gloria said quietly. "We all are." It was true. The woman who'd slept on that couch, who'd begged for a night in a real bed, who'd accepted cruelty as the price of family connection, she was gone. In her place was someone harder, but infinitely more substantial. Someone who understood that love without respect was just manipulation, that family without reciprocity was just exploitation. Willie made a soft sound, and Gloria began to rock him gently. "Mrs. Harris, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What happens now?" "I mean, they've learned what you wanted them to learn. Marvin works harder than anyone I've ever seen. And Dorothy, she's not the same person who used to call you Martha like it was a dirty word. So what's the end game here?" It was a fair question. one I'd been asking myself as the months passed and the cottage became less a prison and more a home for my son's family. What do you think should happen? Gloria was quiet for a long moment, her attention seemingly focused on Willie's tiny fingers wrapped around hers. I think, she said finally, that some people deserve second chances. But I also think second chances have to be earned, not given. And you think they've earned one? I think they're trying to. Marvin apologized to me last week. For what? For the way they treated you. He said he'd been thinking about it, about how they'd made you feel invisible and unwanted, and he realized he'd treated me the same way when I first arrived, like I was just hired help instead of a person. This surprised me. In all our months together, Marvin had never apologized directly to me. He'd worked harder, complained less, shown more consideration, but he'd never actually acknowledged what he'd done wrong. What did you tell him? That apologies are nice, but actions matter more, and that it wasn't really me he needed to apologize to. Smart girl. I'd chosen my ally well. A knock at the back door interrupted my thoughts. Through the glass, I could see Dorothy holding a manila folder, her hair neatly braided, her face showing the careful composure of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. "Come in," I called. Dorothy entered hesitantly, as if crossing into forbidden territory. In the months since Willie's birth, she'd been to the main house exactly 3 times. Once for his emergency delivery, once when the cottage's hot water heater failed, and once when a late-night fever had sent her into a panic that required Gloria's medical knowledge and my car keys. "Good morning, Martha." "Gloria." She nodded to us both, then focused on her son in Gloria's arms. "How's my boy this morning?" "Perfect as always," Gloria said, offering to hand him over. Dorothy shook her head. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk. All 3 of us." I gestured to the kitchen table. "Sit." Dorothy placed the manila folder carefully in front of her, her hands shaking slightly. "I've been working on the rescue's finances, like Gloria mentioned, organizing receipts, tracking expenses, looking for ways to improve efficiency. And I found some things I think you should see." She opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets printed on our old cottage printer, columns of numbers in Dorothy's neat handwriting. "Martha, this place is incredible. The rescue has helped over 60 animals in 6 months. The adoption fees and donations are covering most operating costs. But more than that," she pulled out a second sheet, this one showing different numbers. "You've created something sustainable, something that could grow. With the right investments, maybe some grant applications, this could become a major regional facility." I studied the papers, impressed despite myself. Dorothy had identified cost savings I'd missed, potential revenue streams I hadn't considered, growth opportunities that could triple our capacity within 2 years. "This is excellent work," I said finally. "Thank you." Dorothy's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Martha, I know why we're here. I know what this has been about. And I know we deserved it." Gloria shifted in her chair, Willie sleeping peacefully in her arms, seemingly oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening around him. "Marvin and I have been talking," Dorothy continued, "about everything. About how we treated you. About what kind of people we became when things were comfortable for us. About what kind of parents we want to be for Willie. And what kind is that? The kind who teach him that family means showing up when people need you. The kind who model gratitude instead of entitlement. The kind who understand that love is a verb, not just a feeling." I leaned back in my chair, studying this woman who'd once dismissed me as an inconvenience in her perfect life. "Those are nice words, Dorothy, but as Gloria said, actions matter more. I know. That's why I wanted to show you this." She pulled out a final document, official letterhead, legal language, signatures at the bottom. "Marvin and I want to deed the cottage to you permanently. No rent, no conditions. We've been living there for 6 months, and we'd like to continue living there if you'll have us. Not as family who takes advantage, but as employees who earn their place." The document was a formal lease agreement, drawn up by a lawyer in town, offering their services as full-time farm managers in exchange for housing and modest salaries. It was comprehensive, professional, and completely unnecessary. "Why?" I asked. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. Because you gave us more than shelter, Martha. You gave us the chance to become people we could respect, people Willie could be proud of, people who deserve to be part of what you've built here. Through the window, I saw Marvin loading hay bales onto the truck, his movements strong and sure. 6 months ago, he would have hired someone else to do that work. Now, he took pride in doing it himself, in doing it well. There's something else, Dorothy said quietly. Something Marvin doesn't know, I'm telling you. I waited. He talks to Willie about you. Every night when he puts him down, he tells him stories about his grandmother, about how smart you are, how strong you are, how much you've sacrificed for the people you love. He's never said it to your face, but he knows what he lost when he chose cruelty over kindness. Gloria stood quietly, carrying Willie toward the door. I'll give you two some privacy. When we were alone, Dorothy reached across the table and touched my hand. The first physical contact we'd had since the day she'd arrived desperate at my gate. Martha, I can't undo what we did to you, but I can promise that if you give us the chance, we'll spend the rest of our lives proving we've learned from it. I looked down at our joined hands, hers soft but no longer manicured, mine calloused from months of physical work I discovered I actually enjoyed. Two women who'd started as adversaries, united now by the small person sleeping in Gloria's arms, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving your own worst impulses. The cottage is yours, I said finally, not as a gift, but as what you've earned. Dorothy's tears came then, months of held-back gratitude and relief spilling over onto my kitchen table. But Dorothy, I continued, and she looked up through her tears, if you ever make me feel invisible again, if you ever treat my love as something you're entitled to rather than something you're grateful for, this arrangement ends. No second chances, no explanations. Are we clear? Crystal clear. I nodded toward the window where Marvin was securing the hayload. And your husband? He knows. He's been waiting for me to find the courage to have this conversation. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He said to tell you that he's ready to apologize whenever you're ready to hear it. I stood, walking to the window to watch my son work. He moved with purpose now, with dignity earned through sweat and humility. The soft executive was gone, replaced by someone I could actually respect. Tell Marvin, I said without turning around, that apologies are nice, but I'm more interested in the man he's becoming than the man he used to be. Outside, thunder whinnied from his pasture, and Marvin looked up at the sound, smiling at the horse who'd once terrified him. 6 months ago, my son had been afraid of everything that required actual work, actual courage, actual growth. Now he was afraid of nothing except losing what he'd finally learned to value. That, I thought, as Dorothy gathered her papers and headed back to the cottage where her family waited, was exactly as it should be.